Rule number one, stand up straight with your shoulders back.
People in general now have very poor posture, and it's very bad for them.
Well, that's got to be phone related too, right? We're all
well, yeah, I think that's part of it, but I also think it's something our culture doesn't attend to. Like, you kind of have to remind your kids to stand up. You know, it takes a certain amount of conscious effort. But yeah, in that chapter I talk a lot about lobsters, which I kind of have an affinity for lobsters, and because they, well, the short story is that when a lobster loses a fight, because they're fighting all the time for dominance, let's say, in their hierarchies, he kind of crunches down, so he looks smaller. When he wins a fight, he stretches out, looks bigger, and so he's signaling to other lobsters the tally of his victories, let's say. So if a lobster has won a fight, he's more likely to win the next fight than you would calculate from having a tally of all his previous defeats and victories. And if he loses a fight, then he's more likely to lose the next fight. So that's that Matthew principle at work. Okay, so you think, well, so what? So what does that have to do with anything? It's like, okay, here, part of the kicker is, well, the lobster runs on serotonin, neurochemical. And if the lobster loses, the serotonin levels go down, and if he wins, the serotonin levels go up. And when the serotonin levels go up, he stretches out, and he's a confident lobster. And one of the consequences of that is if a lobster loses a battle, and you give him the equivalent of antidepressants, then he stretches out and he'll go fight again. So antidepressants work on lobsters. Right. And you think, well, who cares? It's like, no, you don't get it. We diverged from lobsters from an evolutionary perspective 350 million years ago, and it's the same circuit. It's absolutely unbelievable. And that shows you how deep inside you, how basic, how primordial that circuit is in you that's sizing other people up and looking at where they fit in the hierarchy. Well, with human society, it's more like hierarchies of competence than dominance per se. And like, if your serotonin levels fall, you get depressed, you crunch forward, and the whole, everything around you turns cloudy and black, and then you're inviting more oppression, right? And so you get into this bad loop. You know, and so it's really important to, if you're trying to get your act together, it's really important to stretch yourself out and sit up properly, because it's part of the psychophysiological loop that can start you on the upward curve. And so it's a really important thing to take note of. And like, if you've been bullied, say when you were a kid, maybe you've moved and so it's sort of irrelevant, you're still carrying that with you in the hunched shoulders, and then you can't breathe properly, and your voice isn't right, and you invite more bullying, because the predator types are always looking for people who look like they can be intimidated, and who will make a nice fuss if they are, you know, like a nice gratifying, they'll make nice gratifying sounds of suffering if you torment them, right? Because that's what a bully really wants. And so that's what the first chapter is about. It's like, it's about hierarchy, and it's a critique in some sense also of the idea of the patriarchy. I know, because the patriarchy is this dominant, oppressive hierarchy that everyone's embedded in, and you know, the social constructionist, social justice warrior, postmodernist types think about that as a social construction. It's like, how about no? That's just wrong. Lobsters have hierarchies. That's 1/3 of a billion years ago. Okay, that's not a social construction. It's part of being itself. And if you only see a hierarchy as power and tyranny, then you're looking at the world wrong. Like, it's true that hierarchies can be tyrannical and dominant, and a degenerated hierarchy is nothing but tyranny. But in a functional society, the hierarchy is actually the structure of the society, and you're actually protected within it. Well, then how you relate to that hierarchy is very important, but that's part of personal development. That's part of standing upright, you know. And then people in the hierarchy think, oh, well, you're someone who could do good things for the hierarchy. Let's promote you.
Yeah.
You know, like, men don't struggle for power. That isn't what men do. Not if they're civilized. They size each other up and elect the competent to lead them. And they do that at every level of society. Like, I tell a story in there about, might be later in another chapter, it doesn't matter. I worked in a rail crew in southern Saskatchewan. They're rough guys, like a lot of them had been in prison, you know. And when you first came onto the rail crew, you got a stupid nickname and people teased you. And I remember this one kid called Lunch Bucket. That was his nickname, because he came to the rail crew with a lunch bucket that looked like his mom had packed it. That was a bad idea. You bring your damn lunch in kind of a ratty paper bag.
Right.
And don't make too big a thing out of it.
And it's dirty and smelly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like you're not pronouncing your status with your lunch bucket.
You don't have a Barbie lunchbox.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So they named him Lunch Bucket, which he wasn't very happy about.
Yeah.
Well, that was a mistake. He should have taken it with a smile. And then he was always peevish and irritable. And if you asked him to do something, he'd whine. And so, like, this was soon after I joined the rail crew. Well, soon, there's about 60 men on this crew. It stretched out about a quarter of a mile down the tracks. Soon, anonymous harassers were throwing pebbles at him during work. We had hard hats on, so the game was, let's see if we can hit a lunch bucket in the hard hat with a pebble.
Anonymous, anonymous.
Yeah, well, because you don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And that was purposeful because he couldn't take a joke. It's like, well, let's see if he can take this joke. Clunk, and everybody go, And then he just got more and more peevish, and the pebbles got bigger and bigger, and a week later, Lunch Bucket was gone, having not learned anything from the experience. But the men were testing him out. It's like, can you take a joke? Can you be useful? Can you at least be amusing? Is there something worthwhile about you? It's like, no. It's like, okay, well then you're out of here, because you never know when we actually might need to depend on you. And if you happen to be hunched forward, weightlifting is really good for that, because you strengthen out your back muscles and it'll pull your shoulders back. And you want that. And it's really important as you get older, because you look at old people, and if they're stooped, they start to calcify that way, and then they start to bend down. And you don't want to be in that situation when you're 40.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to be in that, you don't ever
You don't ever, but yeah.
Maybe 90, but not 40, and certainly not 20. And so, you need to do a postural analysis or have someone take a look at you and say, well, yeah, you're kind of hunched forward, and you got to be conscious about it. You got to pull back a lot and open up. Yeah. It's also kind of I think part of the reason it signifies dominance is because, this is a protective crouch, right? And it's to stop animals that jump on your back from getting at your soft part. So it's instinctual. It's protective, right? So this basically says, I'm open to the world, right? But what it also says is I can handle being open to the world. So it signifies competence and confidence. Yeah, well, the thing about competence is acceptance of vulnerability.
Right.
That's what competence is. That's a deep idea.
Yeah.
I mean, the deepest Christian idea, for example, is that you should accept the vulnerability of being. That's the acceptance of the crucifixion, essentially. It's like, you're at the X where all the suffering takes place. You're going to whine about that? And get resentful and bitter about it? Because there's reason to. Let's make no mistake about it. Or you're going to say,